keep you waiting. Do. Hello! Hello, everybody. This is Bryony Rose Smith, live from the Forbidden Library. And today we're going to be reading Exordium again, because we are just over halfway. So theoretically we have a good 10 streams of this to go. But then again, one of them was particularly short because my internet died, to be fair. However, we have a lot of content to get through. Might end up taking a break from this near a spoopy time because I did want to do like some short stories and stuff as well. Some spoopy short stories. So might be a break at the end of the month from it. But this is probably set to last us into November at this rate. Okie dokie. Before we get started, we're going to do our usual book recap, which is getting quite chunky now that we're halfway through. But here we go. Let's see how much we can remember from the whole book. Okay, so first chapter started off with some guy desperate for cash going into something called the Forbidden Ruins or something along those lines. It went into a place called the Hollow that people avoid because there's monsters and stuff and no one wants to get eaten. But he's very desperate. He needs money. He's poor. He finds some magical itemy thing, but then gets murdered by a Draugier before he can get out. Then we cut to our protagonist Nox, who is in a very similar situation, except he has the added issue of the fact that his mother is basically dying. He is fighting very hard to scrounge up enough money not only for him, but for his mother's medicine. His usual haunts of where he dives for scrap to sell have been almost completely running dry. So he overhears a group of adventurers, a group of scroungers like him, having the same issues and thinking about going into the Forbidden Ruin. He decides to try join them because they have no choice. And at least if he does it with other people, hopefully he has a better chance of surviving than he would on his own. So they go into the Forbidden Ruin, where he is called to the Clavis, the strange magical item that the other man tried to grab, except for the fact it acts strangely to him. Or at least he was strangely, like he heard it, it called to him, literally. But then the Draugier appeared to come after him, just like they did the other guy, so he runs away with the squad, only to find out that these Draugier are attracted to the magical item, so they can't hide from them, they can't outrun them, so he tries to get rid of it, but it's stuck to his hand. MacGuffin says no. And then they separate, because if he's the only one in danger, he should be the only one to die, right? So they separate, the rest of the party run away, we haven't seen them since. Ooh. Just had an alarm on my phone go off. 1 second. Where was I? Oh yes, so he's on his own with Draugier after him, and they end up forcing him off a cliff where he gets caught by some really suspicious webs. No spiders yet. He cuts himself out of there, walks around for a while, finds some stairs up, thank God, but they're covered in webs. So he goes in. He gets attacked by the spiders, gets nearly eaten by the spiders, but then the magical item saves him because he asks it nicely. And then all the spiders go kaplooey, and the magical Clavis turns into a ring, and also a magical talking fox. The magical talking fox is apparently from the stars, has no idea why they're here, was just asked for his help by the 3 strange eyes that Nox has also been dreaming about. The 2 of them work together to try get out of the dungeon, slowly finding their way to some fresh water supply, only to get attacked by the blooming Draugier again. Knocked into the water, fall down a river and down a waterfall. Nox does a lot of falling. They both get very much hurt, but eventually, after much running and much panicking, they do find their way out. And they breathe a sigh of relief. But the Draugier are still after them, so Nox has to keep running. And the poor fox is really injured. So he keeps running and running and running and running and running. And then he goes over a running sort of river And the Draugia come after him, but they kind of melt in the river. And then they're free. Finally rid of the Draugia and finally above land. Problem is, Nox now has to deal with the fact that magic is outlawed. He has a magical talking fox and has used magic and is an elf who means in this world they're pretty much always under suspicion of being magical because they're known to have affinity for it. So, out of one frying pan and into another. Let's carry on with Nox's adventure. The hum of nighttime insects was a welcome sound after days trapped in the oppressive silence of the hollow. Even after fording the river and his wet clothes stripped off to dry on the grass, the summer heat was plenty to keep him warm without a fire. Nox had decided not to move from their original spot next to the river, both of them too tired and injured to go on. Instead, he used his spear to lay the grass down in a small circle, creating a sort of nest where he and Zyuk could sleep for the night. The little fox was still curled up and unmoving. Except for the slow rise and fall of his chest, he'd lost enough blood for Nox to be concerned. But there was little he could do to help. If he survived, though through the night, he had a good chance of recovery. Oh, he's pretty hot show. Don't kill the fox, he's cute! He's fuzzy-wuzzy and a good boy. The bandage would need to be changed in the morning, which meant sacrificing more of his shirt, but it was a trivial price to pay. Now that they were out of the hollow, he could easily get by with just his cloak. Nox slipped out of the grass and across the smooth river stones to the water's edge, making sure to stay upriver of the Draugia remains. He stooped down to take a few slow drinks. Yeah, I wonder what Draugia flavoured water tastes like. He didn't know if the bodies or their dark magic would poison the water, but he didn't want to take any chances. Even after everything that happened in the hollow, magic was just as alien to him as it had been before. All he had to show for his efforts were cuts, bruises, and, well, more questions than he could ever find the answers to. However, he still had his life, and that was no small prize. Looking out to the north, Nox saw the two moons rising from the horizon. Time had been so strange in the never-ending dark that he was surprised to see the larger one had already waned to 3/4. That meant he'd been underground for at least 5 days. If only a little more. In all that time, he'd only managed to truly sleep once. The rest of it had been lost to unconsciousness from the fall into the ravine and the spider's poison. It didn't seem possible that he'd survived such an inhospitable place, but here he was, living, breathing, on the bank of the river. The starlight shimmered off the water as Nox brought his gaze back down. He held his left hand, examining the ring that sat on his middle finger. The runes across its surface were carved deep into the silver metal. It wasn't delicate or ornate like the architecture in the ruins, but more primal and rough hewn. He brought it up to let the metal catch the moonlight. For the first time, he noticed it glowing softly green. At first he thought it was a trick of the light, but even as he turned his back to the moons, he saw it shimmering in his shadow. It was barely noticeable, but it gave him cause to worry. If it had enough power to glow, and the Draugia could sense it, he was sure the Holy Knights would find him. Maybe not at first, but eventually someone would notice. And since it had proved impossible to get rid of it, it was only a matter of time. Going back to Cald would put both him and his mother in danger. But without him, she wouldn't survive. It was a predicament he saw no real way out of. He pulled at the ring, wanting to toss it into the river, but it stuck tight as always. With a sigh, he sank back onto his haunches, turning his hand over to look at all sides of the tiny object. Nothing about it made sense to him. Zyuk and the eyes in his dreams had called it the clavis, but that was about as useful as the scrolls that came with it. Yes. The useless instruction manual. What are you? He whispered, a warm breeze rustling near the grass. I don't understand why you chose me, if that's even possible to begin with. The insects around him buzzed and clicked, filling the darkness with their sounds. It was a strange feeling to be surrounded by the peace of the lowlands and have such turmoil inside his head. The faint glow of the ring glimmered off the water. Closing his eyes, he focused on the warmth emanating from it into his skin. If he listened hard enough, he could almost hear its song from before, somewhere deep in the back of his mind. Is something wrong? Oh, yeah, I gave Zyuk the posh voice, didn't I? Oh, hello! Corrupt Will, welcome! Welcome. Yeah. Just tried to take a drink and it did that thing where the coaster comes up with your drink and then it falls down in an awkward place. Good times. Nox turned to see... Oh, very cool. I'll see if I can get you on in the background so I can give you a view. Do. 1 second. Obviously I won't be able to watch because I'm streaming at the moment, but I'll be able to give you a view. There we go. I've got a tab up ready for you. There you go. Yes, I'm glad you came to say hi. Thank you. I hope you have very fun at your collab. Very fun, I hope. Grammatical errors. Nox turned to see Zyuk limping his way over the river's edge, sitting down gingerly next to him. You're finally awake, Nox replied, running a hand over the fox's head absent-mindedly. They have bonded! Wonderful. Oh, for the moment. Zyuk sighed and lay down, keeping his bandaged leg away from the hard stones. He paused for a long moment. I take it we are safe now. Yes, I hope to have a good stream. Thank you. For the time being, the river eroded away the Draugia when they tried to follow us, although I have no idea why. Flowing water repels the dead, Zyuk answered matter-of-factly. I told you everything in this world is made of magic, and some of them won't play well together. That explains why they didn't follow us into the river in the hollow. Zyuk nodded. Do you know why they can sense this? Nox asked, holding up his hand with the ring on it. My guess is the magic that brought them back to life is tied to that item. They told us they were in charge of protecting it. It's possible the mage that placed the cylinder there did it themselves, or someone else came along afterwards. Zyuk looked over Nox, their gazes meeting. I really have no idea, though. We'd have a lot more answers if we could find someone who could read the scrolls. The instruction manual. Nox felt his skin prickle. Ugh, you're more than welcome to take them when you go. He paused a moment. After you heal up, of course. Zyuk was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on Nox. You don't want to find out what's going on? why the Clavis chose you. It sounds like a good way to wind up dead, which is why I've been trying to actively avoid. He watched the small fox turn away, deflating a bit as he exhaled. Surviving is hard enough without ancient junk making it more difficult. So, what? You'll go back to your city and hide for the rest of your life, then? Zook was visibly annoyed, his eyes snapping back to Nox, his tail twitching. Hide in the shadows, always running? Tell me, what's the difference between barely surviving on the road or barely surviving in a city? At least you'd be doing something worthwhile. Cald is where I belong, where there are people who depend on me, Nox said, firmly gritting his teeth. You don't know anything about me, my life, or this world. Don't tell me what's worth my time to do. Zook clicked his tongue. You know, I don't know why the Clavis chose you. You're just like every other creature of your kind. He glared in Nox's direction. I've watched from the stars for years, and you're all the same, too wrapped up in your cruelly short lives to see the bigger picture. He stood up and limped a few steps away. It's pathetic. Nox clenched his fists, keeping his body turned away, as Zook climbed back into the bank. Climbed back up the bank and into the tall grass. He wanted nothing more than to shout, but he was too exhausted to fight. What did that little fluffball know anyway? He strutted around, claiming he knew about the gods and that he was some sort of creature who lived among the stars, but he knew nothing about Licorice or about Nox. The world wasn't kind to people who wandered off into the wilderness looking for answers to things that didn't concern them. It was cruel and unforgiving, just like the king, his knights, and the Hollow. Living in Cald meant being surrounded by danger at all times, but enemies were always within eyesight and easy to keep track of. Nox knew what was in Cald and who posed a threat to him. Out in the rest of the world, there could be anything, and he couldn't leave his mother behind, not after everything she'd done for him. He'd already been gone too long, and her medicine wouldn't last forever. No matter what Zook said to try and make him feel bad, Cald was where he belonged, where he was needed. Pushing himself up, Nox turned towards the northern horizon and began walking along the riverbank, always keeping the twin moons in sight. He needed some time to clear his head. Lost in thought, he trudged on, always keeping the river at his left side. The moons had risen high overhead before he finally returned to the small circle of grass and laid down to sleep, the exhaustion consuming him. He was going back to Cald no matter what Zook said, and that was where he belonged, and there was no choice with his mother in such a bad shape. The fox was free to leave at any time, although he admitted silently that he'd be a little sad to see him go. But that was the way of the world, and Nox knew his place in it. Oh, but do you, baby? You are a protagonist, and you have to live with that. The next morning, the pair woke to bright sunset. Stream a mouth. To bright sunshine and dew slowly evaporating from the upper leaves of the grass. A never-ending breeze filled their ears, punctured by the odd bird call, welcoming the morning, not overwhelming For the first time in several days, Knox was happy to open his eyes. He was met with blue skies and fluffy clouds floating lazily by. It was a significant improvement from the endless, colder darkness of the Hollow. He planned to never return to that place, even if it meant working for scraps. That was better than being chased down and killed by Draugia's spiders or worse things he'd yet to discover in its depths. He closed his eyes for a moment, attempting to drive the memories from his mind. The faster he could forget the past few days, the better. Although, deep down, he knew parts of it would haunt his dreams for weeks to come. Weeks, if not fucking years, mate. Weeks is optimistic. Pushing himself to a sitting position, Knox looked around the small circle of grass that he'd he'd patted down. Zyuk was nowhere to be found. There was a small spot of blood where he'd been sleeping, but beyond that there was no sign of him. Grabbing his spear, Knox got to his feet. With the tall grass coming midway to his chest, he knew it would be difficult to find the fox. He scanned the horizon, wondering if he should go looking for Zyuk. After all, after their argument last night, before he figured the strange creature wanted nothing to do with him. I have to do what's right for me and my family, Knox said under his breath. There's no shame in that. Glancing over the tops of the grass, he turned on the spot. The horizon in all directions was nothing but rolling hills except for the west, where the river flowed. Beyond it was the large hill they'd exited the hollow from. But as he turned back east, his gaze stopped. Hazy blue in the distance, there was a series of small lumpy shapes. At first, he thought they were storm clouds, but on second glance, he knew that to be untrue. He recognized them, of course. They were the mountains of West Cald. Wait. He turned back east. Oh no, he's on the other side of the mountain. Oh, good lord. So he's gone through the mountain. He's done the secret tunnel. Coaster did the thing again. God damn it, Coaster. Why don't you not just stay where you're supposed to? Anyway. They were the mountains of West Cloud, where the forbidden ruins lay. But their direction didn't seem to make sense. Knox looked to the rising sun, then to the hills once more, double-checking his senses. For some reason, they were on the wrong horizon. Somehow, while travelling through the hollow, they'd managed to go several miles west, further than he'd ever been, beyond the borders of Cald and into the depths of the Jade Lowlands. Well, ain't no going home for you, bitch. The journey to the mountains would take him days, if not more than a week. He couldn't tell how far north or south they'd travelled, so the journey beyond the forest mountains to Cald would be anywhere from a couple days to another week. Being in the wilds wasn't something that boded well for him. Although the hollow was dangerous, so were the wilder lands outside of civilization. The animal populations were small, but that meant the predators weren't particular about what they stalked down and ate. Beyond that, rumours of beasts and thieves roaming the uninhabited parts of Licorice were rampant. Another good reason to stay in the slums of Cald once he got there. Also sounds like absolute bullshit. Sounds like a way to keep people from, establishing other towns and keep power over people. Personally, that's what I see. There were thieves enough in those parts, but Nox never had to worry about being eaten alive by anything other than rats. Usually they weren't brave enough to go after a person which was still in good health. Not that he'd chance taking a nap near an open sewer entrance by any means. That was asking for trouble. There was more than one person who delved into those dank alleyways to never return. What kind of dishonored bullshit is this? None of that really mattered, as a single thought punctured his mind. He'd left his mother with only 2 weeks' worth of medicine. That meant no matter what he did, she'd be out by the time he got there. He'd given all his remaining money to Abby, but he knew it wasn't enough to buy her another dose, especially if Abby had used it to keep her fed. A knot formed in the pit of his stomach. He had to get home, and fast. A small cry pulled Nox from his thoughts as he swiveled back towards the river. Holding his spear at the ready, he walked to the riverbank and looked out. There he saw Zyuk, his back leg dragging across the stones. "Damn this body," he growled. "No wonder mortals never get anything accomplished." Nox watched as the fox continued to struggle, trying to force himself to walk further. The bandage on his leg was already soaked with blood again, and the wound obviously having torn back open. Not wanting the creature to kill himself, Nox stepped out of the grass and made his way across the stones. "Stop!" Nox said in a biting tone. "You're gonna kill yourself doing that. You've lost too much blood already. You need to take it easy." "I don't think I asked for your opinion." Zyuk snarled, not turning to look at him. "Zyuk," Nox urged, reaching out a hand. "You need rest. Do not touch me." Zyuk snapped, his sharp teeth clacking together near Nox's hand as he growled. Nox pulled back, keeping a few feet away from the fox. Something about him had changed. "What's wrong with you?" "What do you mean, what's wrong?" He pulled himself forward another 2 steps. "I have no idea where I am, or why I'm here, and I'm stuck with some idiot who doesn't care about anything but himself." His back legs gave out, and he fell to the stones, his front paw slipping into the river. He heaved a great sigh, sounding like he was on the verge of tears. "Before this, I was happy. I travelled the stars without worries or cares. There was no need to eat, or drink, or concern myself with anything other than watching the workings of the universe." He turned back and glared at Nox. "Now I'm stuck here with you, broken, confused, starving, and hunted at every turn. You want to know what's going on. So the fuck do I." "Well, damn, sweetie." Nox settled back on his haunches, squatting down to be closer to the fox's level. It seemed like he was feeling just as much anxiety and stress as Nox was. For some reason, it hadn't crossed his mind that the small creature in front of him was dealing with a lot more than he was leading on. He always assumed he was too happy to let it bother him. You really don't know anything about all this, do you?" Nox asked, softening his expression. "Even if I did, you wouldn't care." Zyuk spat back, turning his head in the opposite direction. Nox sighed, running his fingers through his hair. "Look, it's hard enough to survive without asking unanswerable questions on top of it." He met Zyuk's eyes. "Even if I don't want to go on this adventure you want to do, I still don't want you to hurt yourself. He paused a moment. It's important to me that you are healthy. The fox eyed him suspiciously. And why the hell would you care? Nox shrugged, not wanting to seem overly invested. Well, you saved my life. The least I can do is repay that debt. So it's an obligation then. Nothing more. Nox didn't respond. Unfortunately, I don't seem to have a choice. It seems I'm not getting anywhere on this leg for now. Can I take a look at it? Whatever you like. I don't have a choice anyway. Missing a Y there. Did you piss? Nox approached slowly, not wanting to get bitten. I'm going to move you now, okay? Fine. Slipping his hand under the wet fur, Nox lifted Zyuk gently and moved him away from the water's edge. Placing him down on the soft grass, he slowly began to remove the bandage, being as careful as he could. He found the wound had indeed torn open again from the exertion, but not enough to be alarming. Tearing another strip of cloth from his shirt, he rebound the leg in fresh wrappings. After he was finished, he took another strip from the shirt and placed it around his own head as a makeshift bandana, making sure his ears were fully covered. We've got a long way to go, Nox said, addressing Zyuk as if he was a child. And you're not going to get far on that leg, so I'll have to carry you. Who says I want to go anywhere with you? Nox was getting a bit tired of the little fox being so snippy. You're more than welcome to stay here, but if you want that leg healed, you don't want to get picked off by some wandering predator, I'd say your best bet is to come with me. Zyuk looked up at him, the annoyance clear in his eyes. Again, no choice. Guess not. Nox put his spear over his shoulder and slipped a hand under the fox once more, cradling in his arms as he stood up and gazed out to the east towards the hazy mountains in the distance. That's where we're headed, he said, pointing towards them. He traced a thin line through the valleys of the hills. The river flows down from them, so we'll follow it all the way there. At the very least, we'll have water for the first part of the journey. Might even be able to find a few fish on the way. Zyuk was silent, keeping his head turned away from Nox's. Oh, here's a stubborn baby. Well, I guess we better get started then. I need to get back as quickly as I can. With a spear over his shoulder and the fox cradled in his arms, Nox took his first steps upriver and back towards his home in Kald. Oh, they were bonding at the start, and now they're not bonding anymore. Now he's angry, and I don't blame him. Honestly, I think Zyuk was one of those characters where he was just kind of ignoring the issues because of the danger, and then he had 2 seconds to think for himself and was like, well, fuck. Well, fuck, everything is different and I hate it. It would be rather annoying to suddenly need to eat and poop if you were used to not being like that. It reminds me of like stupid Tumblr posts where they're like, why would a demon want someone's body? Bodies are so annoying. The upkeep, my god. And he's a fuzzy wuzzy little boy, which is kind of even more annoying. He doesn't have opposable thumbs. He says he likes his form, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure he'll like it by the end. The lack of opposable thumbs is difficult. Let's get through. Chapter 18. It took nearly 5 days to reach the base of the first mountain, where the river originated. The green hillside covered the springs, welling up from deep underground. Zyuk still hadn't recovered enough to walk on his own 4 feet. Although he was small, the added weight had stopped Nox from going as fast as he would have liked. He was thrilled to have finally reached the mountains. However, carrying Zyuk up and over them would prove to be a challenge. He'd hoped for some sort of low valley to avoid climbing, but the mountains all seemed to meld together there. No matter which way they went, they would have to scale the steep tree-covered hillside. Nox looked over his shoulder at the western horizon. The sun was already sinking into the sky. The last thing he wanted to do was spend the night in the forest. It had seemed less scary when he was in a group with others, but by himself, with an injured fox that stank of blood, he wasn't willing to brave whatever might be lurking in there after dark. If everything worked out right, they'd be able to cross the hills in less than 2 days. 1 night spent inside the trees would be more than enough. I think we'll camp here for the night, Nox said, pulling Zyuk off his back. Pulling Zyuk off the back of his neck, where the fox had been draped. Oh, so it's just like, fox scarf. Tomorrow we'll start hiking the mountain. Zyuk hissed through his teeth as his feet hit the ground, his back paw held high. Ugh, curse this fragile body. He sighed, trying to take a few steps before collapsing. Why isn't it healed yet? The blade went almost completely through your leg. It's going to take a while before you can put your full weight on it. That is ridiculous. Nox paused a moment. You really can't heal yourself? Zyuk sighed. No, like I told you before, I can't do that kind of magic on my own body. It relies on energy transfer, not creation. You can't transfer your own energy to yourself. That makes sense. It just seems stupid. Well, yes. Zyuk stared out across the quickly flowing river. Believe me, I agree with you, but that's just how it works. With nothing else to do over the past few days, Nox had been telling Zyuk what little he knew about Licorice and the kingdom of Riala. In return, Zyuk had been answering a few questions about magic for Nox. It quickly became far too complicated for Nox to understand, so Zyuk kept the explanation simple. What it seemed to boil down to was energy transfer. The stronger the spell, the more energy it took to cast, and creating something from nothing was near impossible to accomplish without an outside source of extra power. What that source could be, Nox had no idea, but it sounded dangerous to the caster no matter what precautions were taken. It made the fire Zyuk had created in the hollow all that more impressive. Yeah, Jesus. What kind of damage did that do to our poor fox baby? Magic was complicated and exciting, both of which terrified Nox, but scratched at some deep burning curiosity within him. Every day he woke up terrified from dreams about the hollow and the holy nights. But by lunchtime, he could no longer stop himself from questioning Zyuk further. There was a tumultuous battle raging within him. There are 2 wolves inside him. One wanted to hide away forever in Kald, while the other wanted to be free and delve into forbidden secrets. The things he'd seen in the hollow had undoubtedly changed his perception of the world. Before he'd thought magic was no more than a myth, a tool in the a tool the Holy Knights used to punish people who dared be different. After the long, dark days underground, he realized that magic was as real as anything else he touched or felt. In just a few days, his entire view on the world was changed. Already there had been multiple times that Nox asked something Zyuk couldn't answer. Those remained in his mind, burning like embers, just waiting for fuel so they could catch fire. Nox left Zyuk by the river's edge as he waded in, holding his spear aloft, just like he had each night for the past few days. Oh wait. 1 second. Just need to check something. Not yet. Okay. Carry on. I had the wrong tab open. There we go. Nox left Zyuk by the river's edge as he waded in, holding his spear aloft, just like he had each night for the past few days. He removed the crystal and left it on the shore, not wanting to lose it in the river. The water was freezing cold, so close to the source, having spent little time in the sun to warm up. That played to his advantage, since the cold made the fish slow to react to his movements. In just a few minutes, he'd managed to spear a handful of fish. Ooh! He's got skills! Survival skills. Plenty for them to make a meal for the night. Thanks to the nearby forest, wood was plentiful, and Zyuk had enough strength to give it an arcane spark. He'd been doing it now for the past few days. Thankfully, it didn't seem to take much out of him just to get a fire started. This is the only perk to having a body like this, Zyuk said, taking another large bite out of the steaming fish. Eating is a wonderful experience. It's definitely one of the better parts. Nox nodded. Especially when it's good food. I would kill for a little salt. Salt? It's like a rock, but it's got a good flavour. Makes everything taste better. Zyuk stopped mid-chew. You put rocks on your food. It's not as weird as it sounds. But it's kind of weird though. The fox gave him a look of disbelief. I will take your word for it. Nox chuckled, tearing another piece of the fish away from his teeth. The flesh was soft and tender, just with a little bit of char on the edges. It was delectable and a rare treat inside the city of Kald, where there was very little choice when it came to meat, and it was 1 second, I'm gonna take a drink. God damn it, Coaster. Why you do this to me? Don't you just love when models freak out when you drink? But yeah, I normally don't have this coaster problem because I normally have a mug of tea. But today we actually had some Coke in. So I have a glass of Coke. But for some reason that keeps triggering the coaster. Yes. Oh. Righto, where were we? Did I click too many? I don't remember that. Delectable. Rare treat. Inside the city of Kald, where there was very little choice when it came to meat, and almost all of it was rat. Ooh, tasty. The river that flowed near Kald had been fished clean decades ago. There was nothing left under the surface but seaweed. Even the snails and the crayfish had pretty much disappeared, hunted by the starving locals. Although there wasn't an astounding amount of life in the wilderness, he was surprised at how easy it was to find a meal, especially near water. It made the idea of living outside of Kald not much more plausible. Just not one he was going to pursue. There was only one place he belonged, and that was Cald, with his mother. He still planned to sell off the crystal to anyone willing to buy. After that, he'd find some low-profile work and start saving. If he was lucky, in a couple of years, he'd have enough to buy his own little farm plot where he and his mother could live out their lives in peace. That was, if the Holy Knights didn't kill him first. An anxious feeling welled up in his chest as Nox glanced down at the ring. It still wouldn't come off his finger. Between it, the scrolls, and Zyuk, Nox was beginning to wonder if he'd get within 2 miles of Cald without being killed on sight. He'd half expected the knights to be waiting for them when they came out the hollow, but it seemed they'd avoided detection at the moment because you're freaking miles away. You're probably, like, out of their jurisdiction at this point. All of his life, he'd heard stories about the knights and their strange ability to sense magic. However, do you think the knights are Draugr in disguise? Or maybe they were put there, they're constructs made by the same person who made the Draugr. Yes. All his life, he'd heard stories about the knights and their strange ability to sense magic. However, the further they travelled, the more he began to wonder if any of them were true. Maybe it was just a ploy to keep people scared and under the king's thumb. Either way, the anxiety stayed with him, eating away at him at every passing moment. Even if they got back to Cald meant danger. Even if going back to Cald meant danger. At least it was familiar ground, and therefore he had a better chance to survive it. Nox, Zyuk whispered. Do you hear that? He'd been so lost in his own thoughts that he hadn't noticed Zyuk stand up and put his back to the fire. His ears were flat against his head, his tail puffed out in agitation. Nox strained his ears over the crackle of the wood. It took only a moment for him to catch the rustle of leaves and cracking of twigs in the forest a few yards away. Dropping his fish, he grabbed his spear and scooped Zyuk up into his arms. The fox let out a tiny yelp, but Nox shushed him, grabbing him by the muzzle. They backed into the tall grass, leaving their half-finished meal sitting at the edge of the fire. It's probably an animal of some kind, Nox whispered, crouching down in the grass, his spear at the ready. Our dinner might have given us away. What could it be? I have no idea. We should keep quiet just in case. The stories about these hills aren't exactly happy, and I don't feel like taking any chances. Zyuk pressed his body against Nox's leg. I thought he was in his arms. I guess he put him down, his body tense and on high alert. For a long moment, both of them stared into their camp, listening for the sounds of heavy approaching footsteps. The rustling sounds died away, and eventually the night went silent. What little sound the insects had been making was washed away by the silence, interrupted only by the breeze brushing against the tall grass. Nox stared hard past the fire, trying to make out any details in the dark. Even though he hadn't spent a lot of time in the wilderness, he knew by that silence meant there was a predator nearby. Whatever it might be, if it discovered where they were, it could mean trouble. Nox heard Zyuk gasp lightly as a pair of yellow eyes appeared at the edge of the campsite. They were low to the ground, and so still that Nox had to blink a couple times to make sure his own eyes weren't playing tricks on him. He stared for a long moment before the pair began to shift. They glanced to the right, then to the left. The movement slow and calculated. It made a chill run down Nox's spine. He had to stop himself from grasping at a dark, long stop himself from gasping as a dark, long-fingered hand reached out into the firelight. The dagger-like claws digging into the soil. The hands were almost human, except for being covered in black fur. When you're werewolf! And the tips of the fingers had pink pads for skins. Yes, a werewolf with finger beans. Inch by inch, the creature stepped into the light, its long snout and wet black nose sniffing at the fish. Sharp canines and high-pointed ears gave it the look of a wolf, but something was off. The eyes were too human, and the muzzle too long, with too many rows of needle-like teeth. As its shoulders rolled forwards, Nox realized it had a human-shaped body, but the legs were turned backwards like a dog, and a long tail swished back and forth against the grass. Every inch of it was draped in long black fur, although that did nothing to hide the rippling muscles along its arms and back. There was no denying whatever this creature was, Nox wouldn't have stood a chance against it. Holding his breath, Nox watched as the creature stalked the campsite, keeping low to the ground, long strings of saliva dripping from its mouth as it neared the hastily abandoned remains of their dinner. It stopped for a moment to sniff at the glowing crystal, but turned back to the fish. However, it didn't snatch them up right away. Instead, it took its time, sniffing over each piece and cautiously surveying the area. For a beast so obviously powerful, it was incredibly calculating and careful. The wolf-like creature slowly reached down and picked up one of the fish. With a flick of its head, it tossed the fish up and tore it to shreds, quickly gulping it down before moving on to the next. It seemed so strange to Nox, but something about the creature was almost too cautious, like it was worried about something or being followed. Watching the sharp teeth crack through the fish bones and the sticks they were skewered on, Nox felt a deep sense of dread as he realized the monster was on its guard. If there was something worse out there than it was afraid of, they wouldn't make it through the mountains alive. Nox was starting to wonder if he'd ever make it home. His mother wouldn't even know what happened to him. The days would keep passing by without his return until she succumbed to her illness. The last of the fish was swallowed, and the wolf licked the globules of saliva from its lips. Nox's limbs were shaking from the strain of staying still in his crouched position, but the creature didn't run off. Once it finished, instead decided to prowl around the campsite, its nose pressed to the ground in search of more. It seemed mostly uninterested for a moment until its ears picked up, and it took a few deep sniffs, nose pressed firmly to the ground. It turned its head in their direction. Dirt and dust puffed away from its nose as it breathed out. The blood in Nox's veins went ice cold as the creature took a step towards their hiding place. Then another, the massive claws digging into the soil. His spear was at the ready, but it would only buy them a few precious seconds. He knew he couldn't give up as he tightened his grip on the spear. Making it home was his only option, and if he had to kill a dozen monsters to get there, so be it. He's a brave one, isn't he? He glanced down at Zurk. There were two people depending on him now. The wolf's nose was pushing through the tall grass, its hot, sticky breath rolling over them like a carcass left out in the sun to rot. Nox clenched his teeth and tensed his muscles, ready to drive the spear through the beast's eye as soon as it was close enough. A clean kill would be their only chance at survival. The yellow eyes fell on him, glowing in the dark as the wolf's lips peeled back to expose his teeth. A low, rumbling growl filled the silence, signaling attack was only seconds away. Suddenly the creature reared back, just as a dull thud broke the tension. I believe that would be an arrow. Crying out in pain, it flailed around, tearing away chunks of grass and dirt with its claws. To Nox's surprise, it remained on its back legs, its spine hunched, and its knuckles scraping against the dirt, lips raised in a snarl, exposing the yellowed teeth. The wolf let out a bone-chilling roar, unlike anything Nox had ever heard. It was returned by not one, but several booming shouts. All at once, arrows began to rain down on the campsite. Several struck the wolf, sinking into its hide. Others plunged into the ground only inches from Zyuk, who yelped as he jumped out of the way. More booming yowls proceeded. Hulking dark figures sprang up in the firelight, rushing towards with swords and axes drawn, their blades flashing. The wolf stood its ground, snarling at the figures as they approached. It parried one blade, then caught the shaft of an axe with its claws, roaring in the face of the warrior draped in animal skin and leathers. Before it had a chance to bite, another arrow struck it in the shoulder. Screeching in pain, it let go of the axe and reeled back just in time to catch a sword across the ribs. There was a splatter of blood over the ground as the fur parted, revealing the deep red muscle under the skin. The creature clutched at its side, howling in rage and pain. The massive warriors continued to move in, their weapons held at the ready, trying to circle the creature. Nox watched on, wondering if the creature would stand its ground, but the wolf must have known it was hopelessly outnumbered. Without so much as a glance, it whipped around and flew off into the darkness, dodging strikes as it went. The sound of splashing water and rustling grass was all that was left in its wake, along with a few smears of blood. Nox's breathing was out of control, the panic gripping his heart like an iron fist. The sudden battle had sent adrenaline rushing through his body, but now that the wolf was gone, he was starting to realize why the warriors were so big. They seemed like nothing but darkness during the fight, but as his senses returned and the firelight spilled across them, Nox could make out the molted green skin and tusks protruding from their bottoms of their square jaws. Oh, they were orcs! And they weren't known to be friendly. In fact, now that there were at least 6 of them standing in the camp, Nox felt his chances of survival had somehow shrunk. There was a reason their king had sent the primes to deal with the orcs, and why war had never been declared on their people. They were a ferocious species, and from what Nox had heard, unlikely to react well to trespassers on their land, which Nox now realized he invariably was. "Is anyone there?" a gruff greyish orc bellowed, poking at the glowing crystal on the ground. Nox did his best to stay absolutely silent. He could feel Zyuk trembling against his leg. "Hello? Are we too late?" said a female orc dressed in dark furs. still holding her axe at the ready. Her voice was deep and commanding. "Did you see anyone get attacked?" "Not that we know of. And there's no blood," another male replied, sheathing his sword. He lifted his head and sniffed at the air a few times. "But whoever they are, they're still here, and they're not orcish. Keep your weapons at the ready," the female barked. She gestured for the sniffing orc to lead the way. Nox realised there was something highly unnerving about being sniffed out. "Smells partly human, and there's something else." "What would a human be doing out here? That's suicide!" Nox held his breath, nearly on the edge of passing out. His heart was pounding so much that he thought it might burst from his chest. He looked up as the male orc pointed in his direction. The female held her finger to her lips and crept forward, with the others close behind, her axe at the ready. She parted the weeds with one thick leg, her gaze scanning over the grass. Her eyes landed on Nox crouched beside Zyuk, and she smiled, her tusks seeming to double in size. "Found ya." "Big orc woman, she's that big woman, do 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 do." You like big women, right? Big women with tusks. Tusks are good. Me attempting to be thirsty but not really feeling it. However, I'm in. Like, of all the things to come across, I didn't think he'd come across a bunch of orcs, and I bet they're a lot nicer than he thinks they are, because it sounds like that they've been lied to a lot in order to keep them under control. Their king is very mean. That much is for sure. For sure. We can do a chapter 19 as well. Yeah. But that's probably gonna be the last chapter I do. Methinks, because I am a little bit sleepy. Right. Let's see if these orcs are as nice as I think they are. Because Nox has been through enough shit already, okay? You need to give him a break book. Just a small one. Give him some friends. We want some other characters, okay? Nox lifted the spear up, pointing it directly at the female orc. She looked at him, then the spear, and then began to laugh. Her voice carried across the grass and bounced off the mountainsides, echoing into the distance. Gritting his teeth, Nox thrust the spear forward. In the space of a blink, her hand came down, grabbed the shaft of the weapon, easily tearing it from his hands. Anya, big woman. Big strong woman. She took a step closer as Nox pulled himself to his full height, trying to stand his ground, even though he knew he didn't have a chance of winning. Especially now he was unarmed. He brought up his fists, ready to strike out at her should she take another step. Whoa, 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 whoa. She chuckled, holding up her hands. Hold on a moment. We're not here to hurt ya. Nox gritting his teeth, knowing she must be lying. After all, the Holy Knights were always at the borders of Riala, trying to keep them at bay. How a troop had managed to infiltrate the kingdom. Sweetie, you are not in the kingdom anymore. How a troop had managed to infiltrate the How badly are the people of Kald being lied to? How bad is this propaganda this boy has been raised on? He didn't know, but it didn't bode well. All he knew was that she and her companions were dangerous and he needed to get home. Are you injured? She asked, her speech slurred by her tusks. Do you need help? Get away from me! Nox yelled, trying to make himself as loud as possible to frighten them all. Sweetie, accept help from the big woman. She just wants to help. The orc woman tilted her head to the side, seemingly concerned by his outburst. You're a tough little one, aren't you? She looked back over her shoulder, gesturing to one of the males. Why don't you get some food going? We're camping here for the night. She turned back to Nox. We're not gonna hurt ya. Maybe they can help us, Zook said in a quiet voice, at Nox's knee. The woman's gaze shifted down to Zook, and her features melted into a wide smile. Oh, look at you! The orc woman knelt down and held out one of her hands. And she has a soft spot for soft things. Yay! Zook took a cautious step forward, sniffing her green skin. Don't go near her, Nox hissed through her teeth. They'll eat you as soon as they look at you. That's nothing more than a vicious rumour spread by that rotten king of yours. She looked Nox up and down, clearly annoyed. And judging by this stalking fox you have, I'd say you're no friend to the kingdom and possibly on the run for your life. She paused for a moment. Been dabbling in magic, have you? Have we? Got tastes for breaking the rules? Nox's breath seized in his throat. You don't know anything about me. That's true. But I don't know that anyone who walks around with an obvious magic on his person. As either a death wish or is on the run. She's not wrong. Zook took a few steps forward, sniffing her hand. We came from the Hollow. We were lost for a few days. Nox went to cut Zook off, but the orc female beat him to it. Ah, that definitely sounds like someone who has a death wish. Yeah, he does. That's our Nox. Her gaze stayed fixed on Nox. Why would someone as young as you be out here exploring the Hollow? Nox ground his teeth together, knowing he'd have to talk, if for no other reason than to keep himself alive longer before she lashed out. Come on, sweetie. Put away those prejudices. I'm a scrounger. I have to make a living somehow. Seemed like a stupid place to do it. Everything else around Cald is cleaned out. What other choice did I have? The stress of the past few days and their constant brushes with death was fraying his nerves to shreds. I didn't get lost in the Hollow on purpose. We barely made it out alive as it is. All right, I understand. She smiled softly, holding her hands up to try to calm him down. You're safe now. Am I? Nox cried. Drowdia, spiders, whatever that wolf thing was, and now orcs? Seems like I probably won't live to see sunrise. She locked her eyes under his, her expression suddenly serious. You will live to see the morning. I can guarantee that. Waving her hand back towards the camp, there was a fire being stoked, and food was brought out from the orcs' packs. She asked, would you like to join us for a meal? Perhaps we can get to know each other a little better. Full stomachs usually make for friendlier talks. She is wonderful. That would be delightful, Zook nodded, limping his way over to the fire, completely ignoring Nox's piercing glare. Nox stayed where he was for a long moment, still staring at the orc in front of him. She seemed unbothered by his hesitancy. Patiently, she sat on her heels, waiting for him to finally answer. He glanced across the camp at the half-dozen orcs, taking their place around the fire. He wanted to run, but who was he kidding? There was no way to escape, even if he tried. He knew the orcs were not to be trusted, and he didn't plan on letting his guard down. But for now, it seemed there was no other choice than to join them. Fine, Nox huffed, crossing his arms. Whatever you want. Not exactly the response I was hoping for, but it's a start. She held out her hand. My name's Nook. Nox didn't take her hand. Nox, he replied curtly, still glaring at her with all the venom he could muster. Come on, sweetie. Sweetie, you've been lied to a lot. Come on. She shifted an eyebrow and pulled her hand back slowly. It's good to meet you, Nox. We're going to stay here for the night and make sure that Bledig doesn't come back. Sure, whatever. Without waiting for her response, Nox stomped past her and up to the fire where he plopped down next to Zyuk, his arms still crossed. The other orcs turned to him with confused looks on their faces as Nuluk came to join them. She waved them away as she took her seat amongst the group and began talking with the others. Yeah. Even sitting down, she was nearly as tall as Nox. Zyuk listened keenly to their conversation, but Nox focused in on the fire, watching the flames flick back and forth. Meat was produced from the leather pack and placed on a hastily built spit over the fire. He wasn't sure what kind of animal it was from, but the fat began to drip down the roast and catching fire. A smell filled the air unlike anything he'd ever experienced. He felt himself go nearly wild with hunger, his mouth watering so much he could barely contain it. You're more than welcome to share our meal, Nuluk commented, noticing how Nox was staring at the food. We were prepared to begin scouting ahead for the troop when we saw your fire and the Belig. I'm glad we weren't too late. What are orcs doing in the Jade Lowlands? Nox snapped, still eyeing the roast out of sheer lack of food. I thought you monsters stayed north. Nuluk didn't flinch at his comment. We did until the Holy Knights began driving us out. The tribe elders tried to begin an era of peace between King Ludre and the Orcish kind. It wouldn't have been the first time in history the two forged a pact. She glanced up at the stars and shook her head. But we should have known better. As soon as the primes showed up, they began making demands. They wanted the orc shamans to stop practicing magic, and for the leaders to give up their weapons and their heirlooms and pass through the generations. They were out to destroy the very foundations of our culture. She turned back to Nox. That was something we couldn't do. Why should we give up our way of life just so a king could feel more powerful? Nox recalled the rumours he'd overheard back in the tavern about the primes having a hard time with the orc tribes. They'd mentioned magical weapons and problems getting the orcs to give them up. Nox didn't trust the king in the least, but an entire lifetime of stories and rumours left no trust for the orcs either. So the knights just came and did this for no reason then? Nox scoffed. I'm sure your kind has done nothing to deserve censure. You're as brainwashed as the rest of your people, Nuluk said. But I can't blame you. It's hard to know the truth when you've never seen or heard it. And what is the truth then? A moment passed in silence, with Zyuk looking nervously between the two. At first, Nox thought she wouldn't answer, that he'd finally backed her into a corner. But then she closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to speak. The truth is one that only the orcs and the king know. She fixed her gaze squarely on Nox, her companions completely silent. Orcs are a peaceful people, but fierce warriors when threatened. There's no secret that wars in the past have led to great losses on both sides, and tensions have always been high between mankind and the orcs. However, a war has never been started by an orc. She looked at Nox dead in the eye. Only finished by one. Our most sacred task has always been the preservation of our culture, the world, and our way of life. But Riala and its knights have grown too powerful. The king's arm reaches all across the land, wiping out any who oppose him. She gestured to the others around the fire. We are some of the few great warriors left of the Ninbanda tribe, and we've been sent to find a new home for our people who wait in the mountains. We are leaving Riala forever. If we don't go, there will be no orcs left to preserve our species. Nox didn't respond. He only stared at Nuluk, still untrusting of her story. It was similar to the stories the knights told, always painting themselves in a good light, when their deeds were dark and horrible. He knew better than to listen to someone just because they sounded genuine. That sort of foolish trust would get someone killed. Is there really no other option? Zyuk asked timidly. I'm afraid there isn't, Nuluk sighed. I'm sure even your friend has noticed that life seems to be waning in Licorice. Every year there are less animals, less people, and less orcs. The tribes that once used to visit us from across the continent no longer come. And it's been nearly 3 decades since we saw another orc from tribes across the sea. Our shamans say the end is coming for this world, and are at a loss of how to save it. Nox's ears perked up at that. At least there was some truth in that statement. Everyone across Licorice had noticed the decline of life for seemingly no reason. He'd wondered about it often enough, never really finding an answer for his questions. The king was the only person who vehemently denied it. I'm going to figure out what it is, Zyuk replied confidently. Nuluk laughed. Oh, are ya now? Oh, you are ya? Brave little fox like you on a mission to save the world? That's quite a goal. The other orcs giggled as well, and Zyuk's ears dropped down onto the side of his head. Oh, poor baby. Don't laugh at him, Nox barked, reaching out a hand and pulling Zyuk to his side. Just because he's smaller than you doesn't mean he can't do it. Well spoken. Nuluk nodded, gesturing for the others to quiet down. We meant nothing by it. Just that it was unexpected. She turned her gaze down to Zyuk. I hope you figure it out, little one. And when you do, come to the southern edge of the Jade Lowlands, where the grass turns to sand, and tell us what you found. You're going to the endless sand sea? Nox asked, cocking an eyebrow. If we can make it there, yeah. It seems to be one of the last places in Riala that the knights haven't yet to take over. You're dumber than I thought. No one survives the sand sea. None of your kind can. Whatever. Nox scoffed and turned back towards the fire, keeping Zyuk close to his side. Realizing he would say nothing more, the others went back to talking amongst themselves. Zyuk leaned against Nox's leg, looking up at him with his bright golden eyes. Thank you, he said softly, for standing up for me, that is. Nox glanced down at him, shrugging his shoulder. Sure. You know, I didn't think you cared about things I wanted to do. I never said that. Nox paused, running fingers through his short brown hair. I don't want to get involved. That doesn't mean I'll sit around and watch people pick on you either. Nox turned back towards the fire. Nobody deserved to be a target for something they can't help. He glanced to see Zyuk staring at him. What are you looking at? I think I'm starting to realize why the Clavis chose you. Nox snorted. Well, when you figure it out, let me know, because I still don't want it. Zyuk sighed and lay back down, resting his head on his front paws. He knew Zyuk had an idea of how the Chosen should act, but when it came down to it, neither of them had any idea what being chosen meant, or why it happened in the first place. Everything from the Hollow remained a mystery. They'd learned next to nothing about the Clavis. Somehow it had transformed into a ring and Zyuk at the same time, saving Nox's life, and it was connected to the 3 pairs of eyes. Beyond that, it was a complete mystery. However, one thing seemed certain. Ever since the Clavis came into Nox's life, he'd been in terrible danger. When the first moment presented itself to get rid of the ring, he'd take it. He was ready to go back to his old life, even if it meant living off scraps in the slums and working terrible jobs. Anything was better than being chased down by Draugia, spiders, orcs, and whatever the hell else lived in these mountains. With every passing moment, his hovel in the slums grew more of a palace in his mind. He needed to get home. A metal disc was set down in front of him, rousing Nox from his thoughts. On it was a large chunk of roasted meat and a smaller piece for Zyuk. The greyish male orc smiled at the pair of them and nodded before walking back to his place near the fire. Nox stared down at the meat, his mouth watering. He looked back up at the orc, who mimed eating as if Nox needed directions for what to do. Zyuk took a few careful sniffs before taking his first bite. He let out a small whine before diving in, huffing out air to cool down the scalding food jammed into his mouth. I see, he's not a person, he is a hot eater. What? Drink. Nox glanced up to see Nuluk watching him. He didn't trust any of them, and he wanted to decline the food. But after days of travelling and living off meagre fish here and there, he was starving. Instead, he decided to play along. Yes, totally. Playing along, that's what you call it. The faster he seemed compliant, the faster they'd stop watching him closely so he could sneak away. Mustering up the most neutral expression he could think of, he nodded to Nuluk. She returned the stiff gesture and went back to her own food. Zyuk was nearly done with his own when Nox reached down for his piece. Are you going to eat all of that? Nyuk asked excitedly, already nibbling at the edge of Nox's piece. Before he could answer, another small chunk was plopped on his plate by Nuluk. Eat as much as you like, she said with a smile. Zyuk barely had time to utter a single grunt before he dove back in. Hungry little thing, isn't he? Nuluk grinned, glancing at Nox. Looks like it. Nuluk's smile faded at his tone, and she went back to her seat. With careful small bites, Nox began to eat the still steaming roast. Zyuk wasn't showing any signs that the food was tainted, and the others were all eating from the same spit, so he assumed it was safe. Still, a lifetime in the slums made him cautious. The outside of the roast was crisp and crunched between his teeth, releasing savoury juices across his tongue. It was nearly enough to turn him ravenous as the little fox at his side, but he stayed calm nonetheless, not letting the others see how much he enjoyed it. He was enjoying it. Oh, sweetie, just enjoy the food, baby. Just enjoy the food. The big lady just wants to look after you. Let her look after you. As he took another bite, he caught the greyish orc staring at him. Is it good? He asked timidly, still miming his words. Miming is a word. Nox didn't say anything, but merely nodded his head. The orc smiled in return, pleased with his work. It was a simple gesture, but it gave Nox pause. Maybe the orcs were more like people than he'd first thought. No, never. He still didn't trust them, but they were obviously less animalistic than he'd been led to believe. Is there more? Zyuk called out, glancing side to side, a crazy look in his eyes. You need to slow down, Nox replied, putting a hand on Zyuk's butt and pushing him back to a sitting position. If you eat any more, you're going to vomit, and believe me, that's not a sensation you'll enjoy. But it tastes so good. No thoughts, just food. Zyuk looked annoyed at Nox, as Nox kept a hand on his back. What's the use of needing to eat if you can't have as much as you want? I don't know. Nox leaned down close to the fox. Food like this is hard to come by, so let's only eat what we need and no more, okay? We don't want to be greedy. Zyuk sighed, plopping down on the ground. Having a body has so many rules. You've barely even scratched the surface. Wait till you need to poop. Nox spent the rest of the evening in relative silence as he watched the others bed down for the night. Zyuk groaned at his side for a while, the large meal finally catching up with him. From the sound of it, he was learning the lesson the hard way. Eventually he settled down and went to sleep, tucked up against Nox's leg. One by one, the orcs each found a place to sleep, while two were left on guard. No one else tried to speak with him after dinner, and since he had no chance of sneaking away with guards on watch, he decided to join Zyuk and get some sleep. For a long time he was restless and concerned he might be attacked at any time by the orcs or another creature prowling the mountains. Eventually he managed to slip into an uneasy sleep, no longer able to resist the call of the abyss. All around him were clouds, illuminated by the bright flashes of lightning as thunder rumbled deeply enough to rattle his bones. Above him he could see the faintest outlines of eyes, the three pairs that had visited him before. He could tell they were speaking, but their voices were drowned out by the thunder that filled the air. The darkness thickened like pitch, slowly obscuring everything in view. But as Nox tilted his head back, he noticed it wasn't just darkness, but a shape rising above him. The lightning flashed, and he could see once again, and he could once again make out long chains extending from it, reaching in every direction. It was like the same one he'd seen before, and it filled him with familiar dread, though he wasn't sure why. Somehow he instinctively knew it was something to be feared above all else. He couldn't help as his heart began to race and his blood ran cold. Is it Zyuk? Is it like Zyuk's true form? He can't remember. Like, that is the fox is like the good part that they could separate out, and that's the rest of Zyuk. Zyuk is like some world-ending being from space, and they've sealed most of him away. theories. Then, without warning, it all began to fade away, like soft rain washing the streets. The darkness lighted into grey skies. Grass sprang up at his feet, and he could smell salt on the breeze. In the distance, there was the sound of waves crashing against the shore, and a faint mist hung over everything. He'd never been to the sea before, but he'd heard enough to know that's where he'd been transported to. The world around him was fuzzy. The details blurred at the edges, so he couldn't really be sure where he was. He saw tall black shapes jutting out of the earth nearby, and the green of the grasses. But it was impossible to see much else as it faded into the mist. On his shoulder he felt a light touch. He turned, finding himself face to face with an old woman. Although everything else was fuzzy, she was crystal clear. She carried a deeply grooved staff that she leaned on for support, with a glowing purple stone on top. Her clothing was simple and billowing, made from heavy wool to keep out the cold. She had more wrinkles than Nox had ever seen on a person, but it only seemed to enhance the genuineness of her smile as it pulled her face. Her voice was soft and raspy as she spoke, grey hair swirling in the wind behind her. "Be at peace," she said softly. "Jarvik can no longer see you." Who are you?" Nox asked, his voice shaking. "All in good time," she nodded. "For now, sleep. You haven't had a good rest in so long." She reached out a gnarled hand and pressed the tip of her finger to his forehead. As soon as he felt the contact, the world around him melted away. She was the last thing to disappear, with the misty breeze, before he sank into a deep, dreamless sleep. "There's an old lady in his brain." But she was very nice helping him sleep like that. Very kind of her. Oh, poor Noxie. The world he comes from is a little bit fucked up. His poor brain's a little fucked up by lies. Lies from the crown. No one is surprised that he is basically from the British Empire and they're trying to destroy everyone's way of life, as we do. Whoop-de-doo. I mean, at least they're pretending they have a good argument for it. That they want to save the world by stopping people using magic. In real life, the only argument we had is because we said God said so. Yeah, religion. Anyway, I think that's why we're going to leave it today. We are now 70% of the way through this book. We have just flown through a little bit, I guess. So maybe there won't be another 10 streams or something. Well, no, we another 5 streams, so... yeah. We'll probably have 4 to 5 more streams of Exodium, and then we'll be swapping to another book. I have 2 others lined up. One person said I could do half, one person said I could do maybe the first few chapters, so it won't take us many streams to get through, which means I'll have to start getting more books lined up. Many books. Yeah. But anyway, I think that is it for today. It is very fun. I really did not expect orcs. And we have some fun theories for the future. Let's see if they pan out. Now then. I had fun. I hope you had fun. This has been Brittany Rose Smith, live from the Forbidden Library. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.